Let me just welcome everybody to this week's Future Trends Forum. I'm Brian Alexander. I'm your Chief Cat Herder, MC, and discussant today. I'm very glad to see and hear and read all of you. Just to let you know that the Future Trends Forum comes out of the Future Trends in Technology and Education report. That's my monthly environmental scan and trend analysis report. It's been going on for a few years, so we've had a chance to examine an awful lot of trends over time. So if you'd like to learn more, you can ping me here, or you can take a look at ftte.us. I want to thank a couple of people, organizations, for making this possible. First, I'd like to thank NYSERNet from New York State. They've been generously supporting the FTTE report, and we're very grateful for that. Next, we'd also like to thank Shindig. Shindig has been supporting us in two very generous ways. One is they're making the technology that we're right now using possible, which is great. And then second, by providing so many wonderful people who've been doing just terrific work in making this all happen, answering questions and doing great support. So again, thank you, Shindig. Now, this week's guest is Professor Curtis Bonk. Professor Curtis Bonk is at Instructional Systems Technology, Indiana University. He teaches there at the School for Informatics. He's the president of CourseShare. He's also a speaker. He's also an author of multiple books. I just want to bring in two right now, which are about, one is about open education. This one is about and uses open education and its principles of making. Curtis, or Kurt, is a terrific fellow, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Zach, if you could bring Professor Bonk up on stage. Now, one thing to think about, and welcome back. Everybody,
thanks for having me.
There are a couple of things about the interface that you're looking at, just to remind you. The main page has two levels, where Kurt and I are right now is the stage. This is where presenters are. And as we go on during this hour, we will bring up some of you to take the stage and speak to everybody. On the bottom half is the participants swarm, I think of it, where we have many, many people who can interact. If you take a look, you'll see many faces and feeds. Those are video feeds or pictures of individual participants. And you can connect with them as you go. I'll be doing some of that connection during this hour. Now, if you'd like to give feedback, if you'd like to contribute to the conversation, there are 4 different ways. One is we'll be able to bring you up on stage, so if your mic is ready and your camera is on, you can speak to us. Another way, if you look at the very bottom right of the screen, there are 2 bright orange buttons. One is a circle with the word raise and a hand on it. You click that, that tells us that you'd like to come up on stage. So click that if you're ready to speak and if you'd like to contribute. If you don't want to, either because you're shy or because you don't have a mic and camera or whatever, that's fine. You have 2 other ways you can contribute right here. One is in the chat box. So again, if you haven't used the Shindig before, mouse over your individual icon, and you'll see 4 options that you can click on. One of them is I am chat. And if you click there, you can add chat. A chat box will pop up, and you can add chat to our conversation. You can talk to everybody in my room, or you can also ping individuals as we go. Another way is if you're on Twitter, you can add any tweet. And the best way to do that is by using the hashtag FTTE. You just put in the chat box. And we'll be scanning Twitter during the next hour. So we'd love to hear from you as we go. But in the meantime, let's start off by talking with Kurt. Once again, welcome to the Future Trends Forum. I'm so glad you got to be here. I know you've been traveling like mad. So let me ask you first, if I could, why don't you say a few words about the state of open education in 2016? How do things look?
You know, I just got back from New Zealand, and 14 years ago I was in New Zealand on national TV, my first time ever. And they gave me 3 questions. Mr. Bean got me off the plane, a guy who looked like Mr. Bean, and they gave me 3 questions to give me 2 hours prep. And then we came on live after waiting. And the first thing he asked me after introducing me on national TV, Channel 1 New Zealand, was, what was the state of e-learning? And it wasn't one of the 3 questions. And I babbled on and on and on. Then I got on national radio. They asked me the same thing. And then at the end of the conference, they asked the same thing. They all want to know what the state of e-learning was. And by that time, I had an answer. It depends. And, in some ways, asking this question today is reminiscent of 14 years ago in New Zealand. I was on national radio last week in New Zealand as well, and they didn't ask that question this time, fortunately. But, it was a pretty embarrassing moment in my life, and I hope I don't embarrass myself with an answer to your question about open education, because it's such a diverse field, and there's so many different ways to approach it, and audiences and educational sectors in which to be concerned about. Yesterday there was a big report about blended and online learning in K-12 showing the problems thereof and the kids not completing it. And then today we get an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education on online badges helping refugees prove their academic achievements. We see both sides of the coin constantly in this field. And so you can take either side. You can take the side that, it's not as good as, and I'm a product of distance learning and television-based learning. I was a board accountant or CPA, and I got into grad school from taking correspondence courses from UW-Madison and TV courses, and then I helped create them. I know my courses would have probably been better face-to-face, but the only option I had was a television and correspondence because I was working full-time. And so I think a lot of people are stuck in the same boat today, taking open education courseware, self-paced courses from MIT or from Harvard or wherever around the world, from the Open U in the UK, Seoul National in Korea, wherever. Syrian refugees taking courses from a university in Germany, offering courses from MIT and Harvard and other places are trying to get people ramped up and credentialed because they can't get access to education in a new country for a year. But they can get access to open education. And so I think that's one thing we need to look at is what are the opportunities that people are provided with that they didn't have previously. And that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at, in effect, people who are initially starting informally, dipping their toes in the water, using OpenCourseWare and OpenEd, and then maybe enrolling in something more formal, whether it's a credential or a micro-credential or something more complete. And so I'm looking at the motivational side of things, including the book you held up earlier, the free book, gets at the motivational side of things. And so I think there's a number of ways to look at this. We can look at the psychology behind open education. We look at intrinsic motivation, for instance. We can look at the instructional design side of open education and how we can improve that, or what we can learn from what we've done so far. We can look at the audiences that we're addressing, whether it is Syrian refugees or K-12 students who were dropping out of high school or middle school, and now they have access to a new route to education. We can look at global perspective taking using open education, getting people to become more aware of cultural differences, which is vitally important in today's society, as we're all aware of today. And we can look at professional development. Oregon State and Stanford have banded together to do professional development of teachers. So I think PD is an area, alumni coming back to your university for re-credentialing, for revisiting. So self-directed learning, professional development, instructional design, and then our key issues, also personalization, which I'm thinking about Shindig might be a way to personalize MOOCs, because you can have satellite discussions and still have thousands of people centered around a presentation, but then have offshoot discussions wrapped around it. I think it is one tool that might help us personalize the MOOC-like experiences in a new way, but we need to explore this aspect of personalized open education, and that's my next area of research, but also cultural sensitivity within. Needs to be another area of focus. So I see these things, and I'm particularly intrigued by professional development, to be honest, and how we can change people's lives and how we can catalog the changes in people's lives so as to excite people into education. We do a poor job, I think, of creating case stories. You had my World is Open book up earlier. Have a MOOCs book as well recently, and we try to get some stories of what's going on, like Chuck Severance at Michigan traveling the world with his MOOC. So I think PD and personalization and getting at case success, life change, need to be areas of focus, no matter where you are and what age level.
Well, let me ask, folks, which one Which avenue should we proceed down first? Should we discuss the design issue, the motivations issue, the international aspect, professional development, personalization? Which one would you like? You just pop that into the chat box and give us your vote. So again, that would be the personalization side, the motivation side, design, global perspectives, and professional development. What do you think?
We could throw training in there as well, instructor training.
Lisa Stepanovich suggests design. Give people a minute more to say. Put it here too.
I don't see the listing, so I'll go with whatever you have come up with. But that's great. I'm sure everyone today is in the midst of reflecting on their own personal learning using open education and informal education resources. Learning's wrapped around us all today, no matter where you are. We're in the learning century. We're in a century that at some point they'll relabel it the learning century.
Love that idea.
Maybe by 2060.
We've got two votes for personalization, 2 for design, 1 for professional development. Adult learners, we seem to be all over the place.
And I'll do a shout out to Amy, seen her in a while. I know there's some other folks in here today that are attending that I know. And those that I don't, feel free to email me after the words. I'm happy to follow up any questions you might have.
Well, let's see. We seem to be split, so why don't we start off, unless people want to really pile in with more votes, why don't we proceed with professional development? How are you seeing open unfold that way?
All right. So where would you like to start with PD?
Well, where are you seeing open? I guess if you can do the pro and con side, where are you seeing open making inroads in professional development, and where are you seeing other problems?
As I mentioned earlier, Oregon State has and Stanford has had some PD for teachers, special education teachers. I've also seen the University of London doing some professional development of teachers via MOOCs, and a report coming out from the University of London about a year and a half ago that kind of summarized the effects thereof. Blinking on the woman's name, that's pretty well known up there at the University of London. She does a lot of keynote talks. You probably know her, who she is. Diana Lorelei.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Diana. Yep. I've got that report she sent me, and if someone would like to read what's going on there in a large-scale professional development forum. So you see different universities that might be partnering with others. You might see universities just doing some things for their own alumni and not advertising it that widely. What we've tried to do in the free book, the Tech Variety book that you held up in chapter 14, we have a chapter devoted, and you can download the whole book or by chapter if you go to tech-variety.com. We decided to make that book free as an experiment to see what, it was a fun little experiment to do, but chapter 14 is on supporting instructors, and there are 10 ways, because in a previous book that I had done, what I call the R2D2 book, Empowering Online Learning, the wise publisher decided to delete 6 chapters, and one of the 6 chapters they deleted was on supporting instructors. And that ended up being the most popular chapter in the book because we put it up free on the web. So we updated that chapter and put it in the free book. So chapter 14 gets at how to support instructors in different ways through mentoring programs, best practices, resource support kinds of things, creating a culture, if you will. But that's supporting instructors who are teaching in these online and open educational kinds of environments. But in terms of PD, that could be for dentists, for doctors, for lawyers, for occupational therapists, physical therapists. I think this is the area that's going to change the discussion about the impact of open education and MOOCs, because we can make all the claims we want about learning test scores and dropout rates and so forth, but when you can offer professional development courses and experiences and modules for people in the summer or their vacation times or whenever that they can take at their own leisure, and maybe as part of a cohort, and get some community building like this and discussion on, that's the game changer, I think. When we have now opened up the university, uncorked the lid a bit so as to get outside the fences and boxes that we contain ourselves in, get outside the 15 weeks, the 8 weeks, the transcripts and so forth, to do what we do all the time. And that's, we do summer workshops face to face, but now we can do them via open educational avenues. That's a huge improvement in terms of access to the content, timeliness of the content, choice related to it, the freedom to learn. So our research, we've been looking at motivators for using open education, and freedom and choice are the top two things. People, as soon as you start credentialing, some people want out. They no longer want to access the open education. They no longer find it fun. They no longer find it enjoyable to them. However, as we found today's article on the Syrian refugees, there are points in time in which you need the credentials and the badges so as to get a job in a new country that you've migrated to. So we need both, but we can't ignore the conversation that's wrapping around informal learning, self-directed learning when you need it. And part of that is these professional development MOOCs that are being offered through universities or consortium of universities, so as to make it a lifelong learning experience. You never really leave that university. You'll continue to get experiences provided for you if you want them at the times in which you need them. Does that start the conversation, Brian?
Well, I've got a whole bunch of responses, and I want to hear from other people as well. But it sounds like what you're describing is that open maps onto the learning profile of MOOC students. That is, it tends to be professionals who are seeking to advance, which is very, very different from, say, uncredentialed people or people who haven't had any experience in post-secondary education. And it's different from the traditional K-12 and the traditional post-secondary audience of people who say 18 to 22. Is that a limitation of open, or is there a different way that open appeals to those guys?
Well, I don't think it's a limitation. It's just where some of my focus has been. I think you're right in that people who are not credentialed, in fact, I think in some of our initial research looking at online learning and open education about 7-8 years ago, a lot of the people, for instance, we were actually researching Wikibooks. I don't know if you've heard of that, but a lot of the people who were involved in that didn't have degrees. People monitoring Wikipedia didn't have a high school degree even. They were high school students at home. So, in these early days of open education, I think we don't have a real accurate sense of the numbers. We can survey a population, but this is changing. I mean, in the early days of online education in 2000, I did a survey. Mostly men with tenure were teaching online. 5 years later, there were more women than men without tenure, actually. So these are any numbers you put out there. There's numbers yesterday from your Cable Greenhead, and there was an article in the Journal about 75% of people aren't aware of open educational faculty and trying to get that changed. And so, but these are fleeting numbers, but he brings up an important point. While we've got millions of people utilizing open educational resources today, 75% of the instructors out there aren't aware of how to find them or aren't aware of them at all. And so you've got a mismatch between the learners and people who might be dipping their toes in an alternative route, and instructors who still see themselves using trusty books and so forth. And That soon will change, I think, because the price of books are going up. I mean, we can go on and on about that. It's a totally separate conversation.
But you mentioned price. I mean, that's a third motivation. You mentioned the two major motivations were freedom and choice. But yeah, and another classic advantage, and for many people, a leading advantage of open is that it's free.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So you see people gravitating towards the free resources. And once there's a price tag put on them, they gravitate, like Ning, for instance, is a case in point. My students talked about that 2 days ago in class, and 5, 6, 7 years ago when it was free, it was the tool that everyone thought would be the community building tool. Today, you rarely hear about it. So alternative business plans and models around the free and open education are evolving. I used to be an accountant, so I'm tracking that as well a bit. And we've written a primer for a book, Bob Reeser's book out of Florida State on instructional design and technology. We wrote for the next edition. We came up with 20 business plans around MOOCs and open education. And I'm happy to send our MOOC primer to anybody who want to read it and find out business plans and the challenges of instructional design we go through in there, types of MOOCs we go through in that primer as well. If you go to moocsbook.com, I think we might have posted it up there, so you can get it I think under free resources,
which is very good. Well, let me ask everybody participating now. At your institution or in your profession, depending on where you are, where do you see open playing a role in professional development? And you can think of this in terms of your own professional development, or products that you help make, or people that you help develop. Say your instructional technology staff, for example, and you work with faculty. Where do you see open playing a role in that? So let's take 5 minutes and chat with each other. Kurt and I will jump down and grab you. Take 5 minutes and discuss this. If you haven't done this before, we call this the mingle phase, or the mingle feature, or shindig. But when we're done, Kurt and I will come back up and we'll invite some of you to come and join us so that we can discuss what we find. So again, what's the role of open in professional development in your work? Zach, if you can bring us down so we can mingle. Okay, well, let's get back together, everybody. It's a real pleasure, as always, to see all the different icons swirling back and forth, people connecting, reconnecting, and conversing. So if I could, I'd like to ask Patrice if she could come up and say a couple words about open and professional development, what she's seeing at Cornell. Zach, can you holler up on stage?
Hi, I'm an instructional designer at Cornell University. In a project that I've been working on with some people at some other universities is thinking about professional development from the standpoint of K through 6 teachers and teaching STEM topics, and how can we increase their confidence in their ability to teach these topics, as well as making them engaging for the students. And while we initially thought that MOOCs were the obvious answer because the content was open and it was free, and if we created this great course, it would solve the world's problems. As we started a design thinking study, we started to interview teachers across the globe, trying to get a better understanding of how they experience professional development and what their story is, their pain points and the obstacles they face. And we quickly realized that there's a lot more to it, and we needed to have a better understanding of issues related to infrastructure and support from leadership, time constraints, language constraints, and also really understanding the level of their students. One of the comments that was made was that a lot of this is created for students of a certain level, but that their students actually have much different constraints than what, a lot of what the professional development is being developed for. And so my interest is in hearing if anybody else is exploring this area, if anyone has, is using the design thinking process as a way to, better understand how we design MOOCs. for the, for some of these audiences that we're trying to reach.
That's a
So
terrific
thanks for giving me the
observation.
stage.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Zach, can you bring up Kurt and have him take a whack at this great question?
Hey, Patricia, am I pronouncing that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you're from where again?
Cornell University in Ithaca, New York.
Right. Yeah, Cornell. This is a question with many layers embedded in it, because you're asking about the infrastructure that should be put in place here, the supports that you're not just addressing one school. When you offer a MOOC, you're addressing tens or hundreds of schools probably, and teachers, thousands of them. I designed a framework in a project called the Ticket Project here in Indiana, and it got published about a decade ago, and I'm happy to send it to you about the support structures that could be put in place. And it took us about 5 years to come up with that framework that includes things that you address here: the support time, the instructor confidence, and the engagement side as well. I mean, you tap into a number of things here, and we created mini cohorts. And can you create within, I don't know what MOOC platform you're using, using Coursera, I assume, or EDX, or what?
Cornell is on edX.
edX. There's a tool that came out of Stanford called NovoEd, out of the Stanford Venture Lab. And there's a chapter from Paul Kim in I have a couple of MOOCs things that I've done recently, this MOOCs book and the MOOCs Open Ed. And Paul Kim has a chapter in this edited book that Dr. Tom Reeves of Georgia, Tom Reynolds, and Mimi Lee and I did. And I'll send it to you. He talks about creating an ecology of learning. And he used the Stanford Venture Lab tool, which is now NovoEd. And it has special tools for collaboration and teaming and project-based learning and things of that nature. And so it might be worth it, even though technology shouldn't win the day, pedagogy should win the day over technology, but it's always a marriage between nature and nurture being pedagogy, nature being the technologies that we have around us. Even though you might stay with EDX or whatever systems you have, you might get some ideas from his piece about how he was able to create these mini communities that supported one another, even when the instructional side of things, the curriculum, was lacking. The students supported one another to fill in the gaps, if you will, and provide that and boost the confidence level of each other in a way. And Paul Kim is at Stanford, as I may have mentioned, in the School of Education, and he's probably, I call him the second coming of Seymour Papert. Have you heard of Papert's work with Lego, Logo, and constructionism and all that kind of stuff back in the 80s and 90s? Paul is similar in terms of his vision and his being able to implement his ideas. He created the Pocket Project, getting a teacher in your pocket for migrant worker kids around the world, literacy training for folks. He's done all sorts of fascinating things. So he's talking about in his chapter how higher education is being transformed, and he gives an example of, he created a course called Designing a New Learning Environment that had 20,000 people take the course. And so he had to get his own medicine, had to take his own pill. He's talking about designing a new learning environment. He had to design a whole new learning environment. So I think there might be components of that chapter that you might be able to embed. But in our ticket program, we always started, I hate to say it, but with something simple people could do with technology and not with pedagogy or psychology. I'm an educational psychologist, so I hate saying that. But when you start with giving people this overarching framework of what you're attempting to do, they walk away. But what these teachers want to see is something that works, and that's low risk, low cost, low time. And so in the Tech Variety book, we have 100 ideas that are detailed by a degree of time, risk, and cost. So if you download the book at techvariety.com, you'll see a chart at the beginning and at the end that details, especially the ending chart, chapter 15 maybe, that details each of the 100 ideas. We have a whole chapter on engagement. So And there are 10 activities on engagement listed in the book on how to build learner, instructor, learner content, learner self-interaction. So it can't just come from the instructor in a MOOC, or you will die. And so utilizing peer resources like Paul Kim did in his MOOC on designing a new learning environment is important, but also learner system interaction, learner self-interaction, which I wrote about 20 years ago. Getting people to meta-reflect on what they're going through is vital as well. That reflection is the most important part of the whole process. So I think it's got to be a multi-pronged approach. It's got to be systemic in nature and somewhat visionary to be successful in doing MOOCs for professional development teachers, or it's going to be a one-off situation and they walk away with something minor, not something major. So the framework in the ticket project I can send you, you might take that as a, as a starting point, if you will, or at least something to look at and create your own. Take a look at Paul's chapter as well between the two things. And then we've got a chapter in the book from people at the University of Houston who had students design MOOCs and learn about their instructional design students, instructional technology students, helped create the MOOC and then reflected on instructional design process along the way. So you might have doctoral or master's students, that people who are just interested in instructional design who might help out within your MOOC and get some course credit along the way. I'm covering many things here because this is a big question you're asking. I'll stop there because Brian's popped up here and I'm sure he wants to say something here.
No, I think it's a terrific answer. My fingers have been flying with notes, but it's not me. We have a question from someone whose name I'm going to mangle again. I'm sorry. Tian Huang has a question. Zach, can you swap me with Tian Huang?
Oh, can anybody hear me?
I can hear you, Cheng Hong.
Okay. I'm at Oregon University. We have done a MOOC 2 years ago about teacher education. It's organized by, the project was led by a professor in College of Education, and the MOOC was designed to help teachers, public school teachers, to train them on how to make them competent in teaching the new second language instruction. So they created videos and how specifically pointing out in the video how you teach them, and then the student break into groups. So there's funding from the Department of Education and the state of Oregon to support so that there's TAs or assistants from this MOOC program to assist the participants on site. Say 5 teachers who participated in this course decide to meet together and practice these new skills. And there will be an assistant attending their meetings and guiding them and helping them. So although it's a MOOC, although there's an online component, there's also a face-to-face component built into that. And once the teachers complete the course, they can apply for a certificate, which is just upon completion. And with that certificate, they can give it to their school, and they'll be acknowledged for as passing that requirement.
Thank you for providing that information. You kind of verify a bit of what I was saying, that Oregon State had taken a lead step in this. You mentioned 3 things, more than 3 things, but 3 things that come to mind right away, and that is a space for community building, right? Small space like Shindig can do, as we see here in the small breakouts. If you're going to have success, there has to be some kind of personalization. In fact, Udacity announced this week offering a space for people to come and meet during a MOOC course to meet someone physically, they found it increases retention and completion rates by having someone to report to, a goal to come in, just like me meeting one of my students later today about her dissertation. You know, she has a goal to get so much done. So you have some kind of embedded system for support and discussion. And sharing. So the second thing is the sharing of resources you mentioned, that these teachers in the second language learning or ESL areas or whatever are providing each other with resources, and that elevates their status, their identity. If your identity is enhanced through the MOOC experience, if you feel like someone's relying on you, just like in a jigsaw classroom of collaborative learning, cooperative learning method, someone's relying on your expertise or they can benefit from it, you're more likely to participate in that community experience. So that's what Paul Kim did in his MOOC, designing a new learning environment. He created small teams discussing. So peer support being number 3. So community building, sharing, peer support are 3 aspects of success in building new types of course experiences, whether they're MOOCs or distributed open courses, docs or books or SPOCs or whatever you're going to call these things. There's a lot of derivatives of MOOCs, and they'll continue to be them. MOOCs is just one idea of many that are now causing us to reflect on the changes in higher education today. In the MOOC primer that I wrote, and I'm happy to send that to people, we have 12 design considerations or guidelines in it, and many of these design guidelines are generic, and I've mentioned the first 3, the community building, sharing, and peer support, but having at least a weekly kind of resource recap of what's been shared, so people who might have been offline for a bit can benefit from it and can find a place to go to that might be a warehouse or a resource portal for them. Also, be willing to change midstream. The MOOC that I did for Blackboard, I did the first one for Blackboard on designing a new learning environment about 4 years ago. It didn't go well the first week. Blackboard didn't have the tools set up for MOOCs. They were using the traditional tools from course sites. After the first week, we just redesigned it, and it went, I thought, splendidly well after the first week. So be willing to change and redesign along the way. Personalize. Tian Hung. Okay, so yeah, we got more people. I'll wrap this one up. But personalized experience, use people's names in it, and create moments where people can respond through surveys, like Brian did here, and get involved. So we've abided by 5 or 6 of the things in our list of 12. There are more, and again, I'm happy to send this to folks. But thanks for your comment.
Oh, it's a great comment, and it's a rich answer. Here, I'm typing in a ton of responses to this. We've got more questions coming in. There's one from Michael at Keene State. Now, this is a text question. And remember, friends, if you want to ask a question, you can use either the raise hand button to get in line so you can ask a question like Tim Wong just did, or you can click the ask button for a question. Zach, can you bring the text question up? And I'll read it out loud when it comes up. This was your thoughts on how we can take advantage of open within an intentionally closed system like a learning management system.
You know, we've all struggled with this for decades because, you know, I experimented with tools before Blackboard and WebCT evolved. In fact, I created my own mini course management kind of system with the e-portfolios and profiles and all sorts of other tools, and we used First Class or Vax Notes or something back in the 1990s. I switched through all sorts of these tools, you know, and we all did. The e-college, e-education. I mean, there were a lot of these things that just kept coming up at us. And I wrote a piece with Vanessa Denon at Florida State back in 1999 on building activities around these inferior first level course management systems, learning management systems, wherein you would have a shell of interactivities for critical thinking, debates and rebuttals and pros and cons and Venn diagrams and creative thinking, free writing and brainstorming, reverse brainstorming, whatever. You'd have all these templates that would come out. And I actually gave this idea to Blackboard back in about 1999 or 2000, they said put it in our building blocks. Blackboard was not ready or willing to build the pedagogical tools that were needed to make their system more pedagogically viable, I guess is the word there. And they never did build them. And so we're still stuck with these same first generation. So what I've done in the two 100 activity books is I've tried to create if you combine them, there are 200 activities and variations on each one. So really 400 different ideas from two frameworks. The R2D2 framework, read, reflect, display, and do. The Tech Variety framework stands for 10 motivational principles that you can embed in these course management systems to make them more interactive and engaging. So I've tried providing frameworks to utilize these inferior first generation learning management systems until we get to level 3 or 4 of some of these that are naturally, they're built to foster collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, and motivation. They're not there yet, so I've done it through frameworks, and I think we will all get overwhelmed by all these reports around us. The Horizon report, the Chronicle of Higher Ed, Friends reports, all these things. There's a Horizons. We'll get overwhelmed for all these articles, and because we have our deans telling us to do something, our colleagues, we need frameworks. And so what I've done is try and provide these simple frameworks to work from.
And very dramatically too, and very generously, but making some of them available. We have yet another question, and this one comes via Twitter. It's from Karen. Oh, Karen, I'm going to mispronounce her last name. I'm sorry. It's Cangliosi. She wants to know more about instructor training at the college university level open. And specifically, she's trying to find ways to get tech-phobic faculty to see the advantages of open pedagogy. Can you speak to that one?
Yeah, and it starts with those frameworks. If you provide something they can go back to and use and say, hey, wait a minute. So they now want me to do something. We got Wired magazine this month comes out and talks about augmented reality and virtual worlds and all sorts of things. And, I'm not in that space. And many people are not going to be, but you can by just focusing on the technologies. If you instead start with a framework and say, what do I want to do to foster feedback or goal setting or relevance or autonomy? If you start with the psychological principles, if you start with a framework, my motivation framework or someone else's, you don't have to use mine, but start with a framework, that would be a way in which, and with quick hit kinds of activities you can do that are simple and instructors can try out, whether it's a simple kind of using interactive news. Today's news is wrapped around us every day from CNN and the BBC, video clips from them that you can embed in your class, just like you were previously renting out videos from your media center. If you can make it a simple transition, it'll be a lot easier for folks. So if you go to my homepage and you click on my P540 syllabus, you'll see that I've created for learning theories a whole suite of videos from TED Talks and YouTube that make it simple for students today to see how the theories are applied in the real world. And you can see D.F. Skinner in action. You can see Piaget or whatever. You can not just read these books, massive books in front of us, all the time. Get daunting. But video today, we're moving from an age of Wikipedia to Videopedia. And if you doubt that, if you can go to my homepage and click on web resources, I've indexed 70 portals of video online, like TED Talks and YouTube. So frameworks 2 is thinking about simple things like video that you can embed in the training of instructors to get them to shift over and then have them talk about what they've done. So if you go to chapter 14 of the Tech Variety book, you'll get 10 ideas. Those are 2 of the 10 because we need to go on to other questions, I think. But there are many things you can do to start off here with instructors. Baby steps. Bill Murray in the movie What About Bob? Baby steps, baby steps, baby steps. And
we have this is the most dramatic form we've had in a bit. I hope I haven't caused you any damage in your house. We have time for. I'm conscious of time, folks, and we have time for one more question. Does anybody have a question that they would like to chime in with? I've got plenty of my own, but either in the chat box that you'd like to add, or click the raise hand, or click the ask button. Let me see if anyone's got anything on Twitter right now. Mark Wilson in chat gives you Batman-style sound effects, just so you know. Janessa in the chat box mentioned so actually save the forum links. I'm really glad you do that. I try to include these in my blog summaries of what's happened. Well, if we don't have anyone that people want to add to, I've got a terrible question to ask you, and it's terrible because it's so powerful and so short. Earlier this hour, we asked which avenue we should pursue about open education, and there was a lot of interest in design. Can you take 2 minutes and say a few words to answer Lisa Stepanovic's question about design? Where do you see open education and design these days?
Open education is forcing us to ask these questions, number one, because there has to be some kind of parameters set within this. And so, and because these are open spaces today for all of us to learn, we're constantly learning, we can now start asking serious questions about who's benefiting from it, for what purpose are we offering these contents, what has happened from it, and then how do we design effective environments for self-directed online learning? Because if the majority of our learning is going to be self-directed in the year 2060, and I'm almost certain that that will be the case probably by 2035. Already, Jay Cross, if you haven't heard of Jay Cross, he passed away on November 6th, and he coined the word e-learning, and he has a book that he posthumously published called Real Learning in Lulu. Jay's a good friend of mine, or was a good friend of mine, and he mentions in his book Informal Learning that 80 to 90% of learning today is informal in nature. And that book came out about 8-9 years ago with Josie Bass, and it's probably, we're probably getting close to 95% of learning being of an informal variety. But the conversations continue to be around formal learning. And so the funding from the federal government and state governments and departments of education continue to be about formal aspects of instruction. There's not enough attention paid to adult learning and informal learning pursuits. That's got to change, I think, as part of this conversation about how to design environments for learners. We've got to change the formulas of education support, and there has to be more recognition. And what I'm trying to do is collect stories of people whose lives have changed from this, so as to start that conversation. And I have been interviewing folks, and it's fascinating to see 15-year-olds get excited about physics and decide to major in college, or 75-year-olds who have retired and started a new business through open education and start a new hobby. It's exciting to find about 40-year-olds who decide to go back to college and get their master's degree and bone up on statistics or algebra or something before they go back, and they use the open education space to build the confidence up that they need before they go back, or to hear about someone in their 20s who decides not to pursue a PhD because they can get what they need from open education and web design online, and so they don't waste 7 years in graduate school and instead find an alternative pursuit. These are the stories that we need to start emphasizing, and I guess one of the section of these stories should be about design. How do we design these environments for self-directed learners to create to create a large contingency of our population that aspires to self-directed learning, that feels confident self-directed learners, that shares with each other about their self-directed learning experiences and shares what didn't work, and so we can find the systems. I didn't directly answer the question on design. I tried taking a bigger approach. I hope that was okay.
Well, it's a framework. I mean, and you've moved around it. I hate to pause you right now because we have such a great head of steam going on. We need to have you come back. That's all there is to it. Another forum, because we have a lot more to dig into. Let me say thank you so much, not just for outdressing me, and I came prepared, but for having such a huge, generous, rich series of comments and thoughts. I especially really appreciate your deep engagement with all the questioners who weren't me. That's really excellent. Zach, I need you to bring up the slides. Thank you again, Kurt. Folks, I have to pop off in about 45 seconds, so let me just say thank you all for participating. Next week, we have Deanna Markham back so we can discuss the future of libraries in education and learning. So I'm really looking forward to that. Please make time for this one. If you have any questions for her, please get them to me. Now, one last comment. We've been doing the Future Transform now for about 12 or 13 sessions. We're looking ahead to the future, and I'd love to ask your thoughts about who we should be inviting and what you like about this and anything we should change, anything we should adjust. I'd love to hear your feedback, especially about directions we should head in the future. So I'll be following up with you by email and in person in some cases, and also the next session. So just your thoughts about the future of the Future Transform. In the meantime, thank you everybody so much for a really, really rich discussion. I think we all had a great deal coming from this. And let me again thank the superb Shindig folks for making all of this work so smoothly. Until then, we'll take care, and we'll see you online, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye all.